Welcome to Scope Management. In this chapter, we will cover the many topics like plan scope management, project scope management, project scope statement, collect requirements, perform requirement analysis, define scope, create work breakdown structure, WBS, advantages of WBS, verify scope, and control scope. Let's start. Project scope management processes required to define what work is required and ensure that the project includes only that work required to complete the project. The process involves managing both product scope and project scope, as well as controlling scope of the project. It deals with management of the requirements, details, and processes. Changes to the scope should be handled in a structured, procedural, and controlled manner. The goal of scope management is to define the need, set the expectations, deliver to the expectations, manage changes, and minimize surprises, and gain acceptance of the project. Good scope management focuses on making sure that the scope is well defined and communicated very clearly to the stakeholders. It also involves managing the project to limit unnecessary changes. It's a huge concept to understand scope. Scope involves getting information required to start a project and the features the product would have that would meet its stakeholders' requirements. Scope is the basis for future project decisions. This is a good illustration of scope management and its requirement. The fundamental thing of scope management is we should be giving the customer what he or she asked for. No more, no less. If scope is not defined and documented properly, the results can be disastrous, and the final product may not meet clients' requirements. Poor scope management can also mean over budget and missed deadlines. Above all, it could precipitate project failure. Project manager is responsible for managing scope. In a survey conducted by Gartner Group in 2004, the top 3 risks threatening the success of projects are related to scope. Unstable, constantly changing requirements due to poorly defined scope at the beginning of the project can affect project success. Poor specifications can also result in scope changes. If you put out a product that is not according to the specifications, it will come back for further development, leading to increased costs for the project. This can add additional costs to the project. Lastly, client behavior and communication problems also result into project scope to change and the success of the project. Scope can refer to product scope and project scope. These two terms sometimes make many people perplexed, and they find it difficult to distinguish between them. The product scope is the features and functions that characterize product, service, or result. It means the product scope defines what the product will look like, how it will work, its features, etc. For example, if the product is a flyover, the product scope might be its length, width, load strength, etc. If the project is initiated by your organization, you will have to define the product scope after consulting with relevant stakeholders. It is very important for you to determine the product scope before determining the project scope. You must have a clearly defined product scope in order to develop a well-defined project scope. Otherwise, you'd be in trouble. On the other hand, project scope is the work performed to deliver a product, service, or result with the specified features and functions. So it's all about the project. It defines the requirements of the product and the work required to create the product. It also defines what is in the scope and what's not, because sometimes it's important to document what will not be done, so people will not assume that certain things are to be executed which were not accounted for, either in the budget or in the project schedule. Let's remember the example of product scope. If you have been given a project to build a flyover, in this case, the project scope will tell you how you're going to build the flyover. It gives you all the required information to construct. As we already know, good scope management ensures that all the work required is performed, and only the work required, to complete the project. As a project manager, it is your responsibility to ensure effective scope management throughout the life of your project. By applying a well-planned and structured approach to scope management, you can ensure this. Plan scope management is the process of creating a scope management plan that documents how the project scope will be defined, validated, and controlled. The plan provides the guidance and directions on how scope will be managed throughout the project and helps to reduce the risk of scope creep. Continue. Can we guess the inputs, tools, and outputs for planning scope management? We have Project Management Plan and Project Charter from Integration Management. Project Management Plan with approved subsidiary plans are used to create Project Management Plan and influence the approach taken for planning scope and managing the project scope. Project Charter is used to provide the project context needed to plan the scope management processes. Like other process enterprise environmental factors and organizational process assets can influence project management plans. Scope management plan is the major output that contains A. Process for preparing a detailed scope statement. B. Process that enables the creating of WBS form of scope statement that we will be learning in a while. C. Process that establishes how WBS will be maintained and approved. D. Process that specifies how formal acceptance of the completed project deliverables will be obtained. E. Process to control how requests for changes to the detailed project scope statement will be processed. That's the reason why obtaining scope management plan is so important for a project. Also, we can have ideas for requirement handling in the requirement management plan. Part of a project management plan, requirement management plan, describes how requirements will be analyzed, managed, and documented. Let us go through the collect requirements process. First, we start with requirements. It is actually needs and expectations of stakeholders that are quantified and documented. Collect requirements is the process of defining and documenting stakeholders' needs and expectations to meet the project and product requirements. Second step, let's think about concepts that should be considered while collecting requirements. What should be the main consideration? It will be obviously manage stakeholders' expectations. Requirements need to be elicited, analyzed, and recorded in enough details to be measured so that it becomes a foundation for WBS that we will learn later. Again, cost, schedule, and quality planning are all built upon these requirements. The development of requirements begins with an analysis of the information contained in the project charter and the stakeholder register. Third step, we will understand product and project requirements, which we already discussed a couple of slides ago. A project requirement is the work that needs to be accomplished to deliver a product, service, or result with the specified features and functions. It can be business requirements, project management requirements, or even delivery requirements. On the other hand, product requirements are the features and functions that characterize a product, service, or result. It includes technical requirements, security requirements, performance requirements, etc. Let's go into more detail in the next. Let's think for a while about what you need to collect all your requirements. We have Charter, Scope Management Plan, Requirement Management Plan in our hands that we created from earlier processes. But to collect all our requirements, we need a Scope Management Plan that will show how project teams will determine which type of requirements need to be collected for the project. Requirement Management Plan provides processes that will be used throughout to define and document the stakeholder needs. Project Charter will help us to show high-level description of the product, service, or result of the project, so that detailed requirements can be developed. Other than these documents, we need to use Stakeholder Management Plan and Stakeholder Register to gather more requirements. Stakeholder Management Plan used to understand stakeholder communication requirements and the level of stakeholder engagement in order to assess and adapt to the level of stakeholder participation in requirements activities. Stakeholder Register identifies stakeholders who can provide information on the requirements and captures major requirements and main expectations stakeholders have for the project. Let's focus on output. Yes, we will gather all the requirements of various types, generally consisting of business requirements, stakeholder requirements, solution requirements, project requirements, transition requirements, assumptions, dependencies, and constraints. These requirements are noted as a part of requirement documentations and trades according to the needs as a part of requirements traceability matrix, like business needs, project objectives, project scope, WBS deliverables, product design, product development, test strategy, and test scenarios. High-level requirements to more detailed requirements. Now, there are many tools like interviews, focus groups, facilitated workshops, group creativity technique, group decision-making technique, questionnaires and surveys, observations, prototypes, benchmarking, context diagram, and document analysis to collect requirements. We will learn all techniques overview in next slides. The important thing is that the needs and requirements of the customer and other key stakeholders need to be translated from high-level requirements to more detailed requirements that eventually will turn into the deliverables that comprise the work breakdown structure that we will be discussing very soon. Let's go through the tools and techniques to be used while collecting requirements. An interview is a formal or informal approach to discover information from stakeholders by talking to them directly. It is typically performed by asking prepared and spontaneous questions and recording the responses. Interviews are often conducted one-on-one, but may involve multiple interviewers and/or multiple interviewees. Another tool, focus groups, brings together pre-qualified representative stakeholders and subject matter experts to learn about their expectations and attitudes about a proposed product, service, or result. A trained moderator guides the group through an interactive discussion designed to be more conversational than a one-on-one interview. Facilitated workshops are worked by focused sessions that bring together key and cross-functional stakeholders to define product requirements. It helps determine critical characteristics of new product development. We also use group creativity techniques like brainstorming, nominal group technique, and Delphi techniques. Brainstorming techniques used to generate and collect multiple ideas related to project and product requirements. Nominal group technique enhances brainstorming, with a voting process used to rank the most useful ideas for further brainstorming or for prioritization. The in-Delphi technique, a selected group of experts, answers questionnaires and provides feedback regarding the responses from each round of requirements gathering. The responses are only available to the facilitator to maintain anonymity. In idea or mind mapping, ideas created through individual brainstorming are consolidated into a single map to reflect commonality and differences in understanding and to generate new ideas. Affinity diagram technique allows large numbers of ideas to be sorted into groups for review and analysis. Once the requirements are defined, we start to add more details to them in the define scope process, where we take the requirements and determine what is in scope or not in scope. By definition, define scope is a process of developing a detailed description of the project or a product that is being developed. In define scope, a written project statement is developed that consists of the product and project scope. The result is a project scope statement depicting the details of the project. The scope statement lists the product or service that will be delivered at the end of the project. We are not going in detail of project and product scope, as we already discussed this earlier. Just discuss an example for a reminder of our learning. A project manager for a construction work thought that he will be using a special type of cement for concreting, but that special cement was not available in that place. He explained who was responsible for ordering and delivering the materials from his side, Taking on that responsibility doesn't change the product scope that is, house construction, but now the activity that is in project scope and its responsibility was completely explained. After the contractor started the work, with the plan and estimate, the customer suggested adding a heavy wall construction near the entrance for security purposes, but this was different from what was agreed upon. So the contractor was told this was extra work, and he did it with extra money. That is scope creep. During project initiation, it is very important to include all the details on deliverables, assumptions, and constraints to ensure that the understanding of all stakeholders is captured. You can have a multi-phased approach where a preliminary scope statement is prepared initially during the initiation phase. This also helps in getting sign-offs from the client at an early stage. After gathering all the information, a final scope statement can be developed during the planning process. A multi-phased approach is usually considered in larger and complex projects. In the next slide, we'll discuss more on this process. As we already know, defined scope process deals with project and product scope, outlines what will be and what will not be included in the deliverables, including details of risks, constraints, and assumptions. Defined scope provides alternatives if the budget and schedule could not meet management's expectations. Remember the term value engineering that is a part of the product analysis technique to find alternatives to constraints to improve product or reduce cost without sacrificing the scope. Can you guess the difference between defined scope and project charter? Project charter includes high-level descriptions of projects. Let's think about the input and outputs for this process. Scope management plan establishes activities for developing, monitoring, and controlling the project scope. Requirement documentations used to select the requirements that will be included in the project. Project charter provides the high-level description and product characteristics. As usual, organizational process asset has a big influence to define scope. Project scope statement is the main output here. Project scope statement includes objectives, project and product, scope, requirements, boundaries, deliverables, acceptance criteria, constraints, assumptions, milestones, cost estimation, specifications, configuration management requirements, approval requirements, etc. The scope statement is progressively elaborated. With expert judgment, product analysis, alternative generation, facilitated workshop are the main tools and techniques used to define product scope. Alternative generation, as the name indicates, develops many potential options as possible in order to identify different approaches to perform the work of the project. Facilitated workshop helps to reach a cross-functional and common understanding of the project objectives and its limitations.